This is our monthly Sunday law of the Salon. I can't begin to tell you what number it is, but that's okay.
23.
Martin, you are here with me today. Martin, your full name, you're Martin Turnbull. That is your full name, good. How was your little interlude at the F. Scott Fitzgerald walking tour in West Hollywood yesterday?
That was wonderful. Adrian, who runs the West Coast branch of the Dorothy Parker Society, has this wonderful last days of F. Scott Fitzgerald tour that she does around West Hollywood. The Garden of Alla Hotel is an integral part of Scott Fitzgerald's time in Hollywood. And she has this great walking tour that if any of you have a chance to do it, it's great because she goes around and visits the various places that Scott Fitzgerald lived in the last couple of years of his life, which was spent out in Hollywood. And so I participated yesterday because the tour starts on the site of the Garden of Alla Hotel. So I came along and gave a little bit of a spiel about the hotel. We put it all into perspective of where Scott Fitzgerald came when he came to Hollywood for the last time.
Perfect interlude. Okay, Mark, you're here to talk about your novel, your series, The Garden of Alla. On the screen is a photo of the Garden of Alla. Very early, and it's when, well, I don't want to give it away, but you're going to talk for a while. We're going to leave it on the screen. Why don't you give us a date for this photo as soon as you get started, and we'll just leave it at that. And your talk and your slideshow will bring us through the demise of the Garden of Alla, which was a residency hotel at Crescent Heights and Sunset. And that's just at the border of Hollywood, West Hollywood. It was now West Hollywood in the city of Los Angeles. At the time, it was unincorporated Los Angeles County. So, take it away.
Okay, thanks, Richard and Kim. I haven't said anything yet. Okay, so this photograph you're looking at here was the original house that evolved into the Garden of Alla Hotel. It was built by a real estate developer by the name of William Hay. He built this house in 1913. And it eventually evolved into the main building of the Garden of Alla Hotel. But we'll get to that. We'll get to that later. The Garden of Alla Hotel opened in 1927, which really was as the Jazz Age was reaching its peak years before everything fell into a heap with the black market crash. So 27 is when it opened, and we think of the Jazz Age as being this age of excess, a lot of money, a lot of parties, a lot of dancing, a lot of illicit boozing, a lot of dancing on tabletops and raised hemlines, and it was a real age of excess. And the Garden of Alla, which opened kind of at the height of that, really came to symbolize the Jazz Age in all of that going on, because all those words I used to describe the Jazz Age, I could use to describe life at the Garden of Alla Hotel, because it was one of these places where kind of anything went. Now the big difference is the Jazz Age ended at the stock market crash in '29. Sounds like nobody told the people who lived at the Garden of Alla that, because they just kept on partying. And they kept on partying through the 30s, the 40s, and the 50s, right up to and including the closing night party, which was August in 1959. So right at the very start, the Garden of Alla had a reputation as being quite the party town. And there's a reason for that I want to go into, because I think it's kind of interesting. We need to go back to 1918. 1918 was the year that a Russian actress by the name of Alla Nazimova arrived in town. Now Nazimova was a huge Broadway star. She had 10 years of enormous success on Broadway. So naturally, she came under the attention of the movie studios. She signed a contract with Metro Pictures under Louis B. Mayer and arrived in Hollywood already a hugely established star, ready to commence her film career. So being the big star that she was, the big dramatic star that she was, she wanted to establish herself in Hollywood. So she looked around for a place to buy. and she found this house. This house stood on the corner of Sunset and Crescent Heights, and she bought it for $65,000, and which was quite a sum of money. Then she spent another $65,000 to do it up in the manner that she wanted. She could afford to do this because her contract at Metro Pictures paid her $13,000 a week. I wouldn't mind having that now, let alone in 1918. And to put that into perspective, at the same time, Mary Pickford was being paid only $10,000 a week. So that gives you an idea of Alla's status as a symbol. She was probably, I would imagine, the highest paid actress in the world at the time. So she comes to Hollywood and she wants to establish herself there. She buys a big house, she does it up, and then she started to develop these salons. Alla was a very sophisticated, talented, intelligent, ambitious woman who wanted to gather like-minded people around her. So she started these salons where she would invite other European immigrants and East Coast intellectuals to come to her house on Sunset, this house here, to do these, have these salons. And so these people would come and they would talk about history and philosophy and art and literature. And so the house itself became known, Alla Nazimova's house became known as an interesting place where interesting people would come to talk about interesting things. So it evolved over time that it was an interesting place to be invited to, and interesting things happened there. And that probably would have gone on probably for decades, except in the early 20s, Nazimova produced a couple of very expensive movies, Salome and Camille, that were huge flops, and it drained most of her money. So a couple of people by the name of Adams, the Adamses came to her and said, look, we've got this great idea. You have this property, 3.5 acres. Why don't you turn this into a hotel? We could take the main building and convert your rooms into hotel rooms. Then we could build these villas around the yard, and it would provide you with an ongoing income because, let's face it, this movie career is kind of going down the toilet for you, so you need to do something. How about we do that? So Alla thought it was a good idea, and it was. And so she gave what I assume was most of the rest of her money to the Adamses to build this hotel. And then probably went on to it and didn't really pay attention to it. So the Adamses did what they said. They built this hotel, they built these duplex villas around the yard and built the hotel, then kind of sort of ran away into the night with the rest of her money. So by the time the hotel was ready to open, she was already kind of broke, and she kind of staggered on for about another year until the whole thing sent her completely bankrupt, and she ended up living in one of the villas in what used to be her own backyard, which must have been a little bit humiliating. But that's Hollywood for you. But the hotel itself was a huge and instant success. Just the building of the hotel was enough to make the papers, and the opening of the hotel was enough to make the papers because Alla had spent nearly 10 years building this reputation of her house as an interesting place where interesting people go. So when the hotel opened, it was a huge and instant success. And it was a place that attracted largely writers and actors. Now the actors came to Hollywood because they wanted to. They wanted to try their luck in Hollywood. The writers, not so much. The writers that came to Hollywood were there because they were, the studios had dangled these big juicy carrots in front of them, and they would pay them $1,000 a month to write a week to write pictures for write movies for Hollywood. So these people that came out west, the ones that stayed at the Garden of Alla I'm talking about, were members of the Algonquin Round Table. They were fairly serious literary types whose literary ambitions were to contribute to the art of literature. Not like this drivel out in Hollywood, but okay, if you're going to pay me $1,000 a month in 1929, or even worse, in 1930 when the Depression kicked in, then okay, we'll do it. So, into the Garden Alla came these actors and writers who were very intelligent, they were very articulate, they were very talented, and they were very social. And by social, what I really mean is they drank a lot. So these people were very social. They were very much interested in other people's ideas. It wasn't a competitive, you got my contract at MGM, so I'll have to take yours from Paramount. There was very much a community. So these people would come into the Garden of Alla to fulfill these contracts. Now the first one that came was Robert Benchley, who was a humorist and a drama critic. Where Robert Benchley went, Dorothy Parker wasn't far behind. So Dorothy Parker arrived at the Garden of Alla. So then other members of the Algonquin Round Table, as each studio started dangling a carrot in front of them, they would come to Hollywood kind of reluctantly. So if you don't really want to be here, you might as well pick a place where all your friends are. Well, Robert Benchley and Dorothy Parker at the Garden of Alla, so I'll stay there too. So over time, the people who stayed at the Garden of Alla were a very literary, articulate, clever bunch. So the Garden of Alla Hotel, as time went on, came to be the place where the tradition that Alla had started, interesting people came to do interesting things. The interesting things they were doing were building these, what became legendary careers afterwards, but at the time they were just working and hanging out with their friends at the Garden of Alla Hotel. I'm going to read a list that I made up of people who stayed at the Garden of Alla Hotel over the years. This list could have easily been 3 pages long because all sorts of interesting people stayed there. So I just wanted to read you a list of the people who stayed there. And you'll get an idea of the sort of cocktail parties that went on at the Garden of Alla after everybody finished, after everybody put down their typewriters and started to play. Because like I said, they like to play. So among the people who stayed at the Garden of Alla were the likes of Tallulah Bankhead, Robert Benchley, Bernie and McCall, Clara Bow, Charlie Butterworth, Louis Calhern, John Carradine, Eddie Chodoroff, who wrote Barry Was a Lady, Ronald Colman, Marc Connelly, who was another Algonquinite, F. Scott Fitzgerald, Errol Flynn, David Niven, Ava Gardner, Jackie Gleason, Dorothy Gish, Garson Kanan and Ruth Gordon, who wrote Born Yesterday, Frances Goodrich and Albert Hackett. They were a pair of screenwriters. They wrote It's a Wonderful Life and a lot of the Thin Man movies. Lillian Hellman, George Kaufman, Charles Lawton and Nelson Lanchester, Somerset Maugham, Harper Marx, Eddie Justice Mayer, who wrote To Be or Not to Be, Flora Robson, Natalie Schaefer, who later became Mrs. Howell on Gilligan's Island. Even Mrs. Howell stayed at the Garden of Alla. Bandleader Artie Shaw, Arthur Sheikman, who wrote Call Me Madam, Frank Sinatra, Red Skelton, MGM vocal arranger Kay Thompson. Kay Thompson did a lot of the vocal arrangements for the musical stars at MGM, especially Judy Garland. So hers was a very musical household at the Garden of Alla. Donald Ogden Stewart, who wrote the Philadelphia Story, conductor Leopold Stokowski, Orson Welles, and Alexander Woollcott. So imagine you check into the Garden of Alla and you walk out of your villa and these people are just hanging around the pool having a cocktail or 7. So you can get an idea of how the legend of the Garden of Alla Hotel evolved. When I came across it, the first thing that struck me was that the Garden of Alla Hotel opened in 1927. That was the dawn of the talkies. The jazz singer opened in 1927 and the Garden of Alla opened just before that. So it opened in 27, the dawn of the talkies, and it closed in 59, which was really the dusk of the studio system. So really, the way I see it, what makes the Garden of Alla Hotel really an interesting place to visit and to write about is that it opened for the beginning of what we now look upon as the golden years of Hollywood, from 27 to 59. So the people who lived at the Garden of Alla witnessed the unfolding evolution of the golden years of Hollywood, from the advent of the talkies to the development of Technicolor, to the wartime propaganda years, into the post-war boom, through into the onslaught of television and the fight against that with the biblical epics and the cinerama. So they witnessed and in a lot of times participated in the evolution of the golden years of Hollywood, which I thought was a very rich field to write about, and quite honestly I couldn't believe nobody had done anything with it. So I thought, well, apparently it's up to me. So what I'm doing is writing a history of Hollywood as seen through the eyes of the people who lived at the Garden of Alla. So that's what I'm about. I have some photos here of the Garden of Alla and a few people involved, but Richard and Kim, no, okay, all right. So what I'll also do is I'm going to read you a passage from my first book. Because today's theme was the jazz age of LA, there's a scene in the first chapter of the first book which is a very jazz agey sort of scene, and I think it serves to introduce you to sort of the feel of what I'm going for here. So I'm going to read. There's only two things you need to know really. The character in this book has been run out of town by his father, and he comes to the only address he knows outside of his own hometown, which is 8152 Sunset Boulevard. The other thing you need to know is that John Zack, who does the audio book narration of my novels, probably does a lot better job than I'm about to do, but you'll just have to bear with me. Marcus set his suitcase down in the dust and stared at the gold letters of Alla. He didn't expect Sunset Boulevard to be a dirt track, and he certainly didn't expect to find a hotel sign out the front of Alla Nazimova's movie star mansion. He peered at the hotel past the sign. It was painted the same cream as the garden wall, with dark arched windows and brown shutters. It looked like the California missions he had studied in high school. He pulled out a handkerchief and swiped his broad forehead around cheeks and the back of his neck. It was hard to believe this was January. Back home, they'd be shoveling the driveway, but here there wasn't even a cool breeze. He picked up his suitcase and made his way past a long bed of pale roses and into the white hotel. The murky foyer had panelled walls and octagonal avocado green tiles the size of dinner plates. The reception desk would have been hard to spot without the lamp casting a pool of amber light on it. Its stained glass shade was a kitschy pyramid with a sphinx and a clump of palm trees. There was no one in sight. Marcus rang the bell. Laughter and clinking glasses wafted through the double doors that opened onto a wide brick path to a swimming pool curved like a grand piano at the far end. A crowd too large to count was scattered around it in knots of 4s and 5s, 100, 200 people maybe. Shiny tuxedos, sparkling diamonds, ropes of pearls, patent leather shoes. Marcus gaped at a clutch of women dancing the black bottom. Their short hair, high hemlines and cigarettes were a far cry from the Pennsylvania Dutch girls he'd grown up with. A girl Marcus had known in McKeesport had turned up at a St. Stephen's tea social with her hair bobbed like Louise Brooks and her stockings rolled down below her knees. She hadn't lasted 10 minutes and Marcus had never seen her again. Maybe she'd been run out of town too. 6 days, 3 trains, a bus and 2 streetcars later, the sting of his father's words still jabbed at Marcus's heart. You get out of my town and you get as far as you can go and don't you come back. On the night train to Chicago, he had stared into the darkness and wondered where to go. 8152 Sunset Boulevard was the only address outside of McKeesport he knew, so when his train pulled into Chicago, he took the next one heading west. There wasn't a pit-fit curl in sight at this party. It was all crisp bangs, bright rouge and red lipstick, ivory cigarette holders and cream bow ties and outrageous 3-inch heels. Oriental butlers circulated with silver cocktail trays and virtually every girl had a martini in her hand. So much for 7 years of prohibition. There was a lively, frantic quality to this crowd Marcus had never witnessed before. Everyone seemed to be having such a riot he had to wonder what was so bad about booze if this was the result. A troupe of musicians decked out like Spanish matadors made their way to the pool and lined up at the far end. They brought their continental spin on Ain't She Sweet to a close and started counting backwards from 10. When they shouted, 1! The trumpeter blew a long note, and paper lanterns in orange, blue, green and red, strung out through the maple trees, lit up, transforming the garden into a fairy tale wonderland with their gentle glow. The crowd sighed and clapped. It looks like the set of Camille, thought Marcus, when Nazimova wore that shimmering cloak with white camellias. How luminous she had been, falling in love with Valentino. The matadors merged into the crowd, playing 5'2", Eyes of Blue, and the chatter swelled again. "You look a little lost." The voice belonged to a tall man with a long, narrow face. It took Marcus a moment to realise he was staring into the eyes of Francis X. Bushman. Marcus had seen Ben Hur 12 times when it came to McKeesport, and he thought Bushman was stupendously hateful as Masala the villain. Tonight he wore a tuxedo that looked twice as expensive as Marcus's entire wardrobe. His first movie star. The words dried up on Marcus's tongue like August dirt. Bushman peered down at this cardboard suitcase and his eyes lit up. "Good gravy, you're here to check in." Bushman lifted his hand to his mouth. "Hey, Brophy!" The actor's voice carried easily over the commotion. A white-faced man with a Cheshire cat smile turned around and raised his eyebrows. Bushman grabbed Marcus's suitcase out of his hand and lifted it high. "You have a guest." Brophy cut through the crowd with the eagerness of our groundhogging in February. "Is that right, son? You want to check in? To the hotel?" Marcus scanned the crowd. He couldn't see Alla Nazimova anywhere. "This is 8152 Sunset Boulevard, isn't it?" "Sure is." Marcus felt stupid asking if Madame Nazimova still lived there. "This is a hotel, you big nincompoop," he told himself. "Clearly she isn't here anymore. I guess I do need a room," he considered. Brophy stepped up to the diving board and let out a whistle that slashed through the crowd and stopped the band. "Everybody," Brophy announced, "I have an exciting announcement to make. I would like to introduce you all to a most important person." He pulled Marcus up alongside him on the diving board and out of the side of his mouth murmured, "What's your name, kid?" "Marcus Adler. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to present the Garden of Alla's Hotel's very first guest, Mr. Marcus Adler, Esquire." The crowd, easy to impress on bathtub gin, let out a corrective "ooh" and burst into a thunderclap of applause. "Mr. Adler hails from the great city of," he nudged Marcus, "McKeesport, Pennsylvania." "Of McKeesport, Pennsylvania." Brophy spun around in surprise. "McKeesport? Ain't that where the first Nickelodeon opened up?" Marcus nodded. It was McKeesport's sole claim to fame. Thin, to be sure, but eagerly brought up in every conversation with every visiting relative and full of Rushmen passing through town. "Seems to me," Brophy beamed, "that our Mr. Adler here is bringing the coals back to Newcastle, which I think qualifies him to an extra special rate. What do you say, friends?" A loud cheer erupted. It dropped off quickly, though. The crowd was keen to get back to its gin. Brophy swept Marcus off the diving board, wrapped up his suitcase and led him into the gloomy foyer. He opened the first page of the hotel register, swung it around toward Marcus and handed him a fountain pen. "You on the level about being from McKeesport?" Marcus nodded. "Well, if that don't beat all. You planning on staying along with us, Mr. Adler?" Marcus looked up from the blank page and summoned up a fistful of courage. "Does Alla Nazimova still live here?" So that is the first chapter of the first novel of what I planned out to be a series of 9 novels, which will take us through the history of Hollywood via its various incarnations. I now have some photos to show, to give you an idea of what the Garden of Alla Hotel looked like. So this was Alla Nazimova. She was quite the luminous beauty. This was probably at her height in the early 20s. Very much, as I said, a woman of her era. Also a woman of her era in that she knew how to pull in the big bucks. Not so great at holding on to them. Some things never change, do they? So this is Alla Nazimova. This is from Camille. This is Alla Nazimova with Valentino, who played her love interest. She wasn't very impressed with Valentino when she first met him. She kind of brushed him aside, dismissed him as a gigolo, but then his power started to raise and she decided to cast him in her version of Camille, which is one of the movies that she produced herself. Next. Wow. And this is from Salome. Salome was quite the cutting-edge movie. It's kind of cutting-edge now, let alone in the early 20s. And this was kind of one of the photos that you most often see of Alla, because it's so striking with these baubles decorating her hair. It's quite groundbreaking. No other Salome has ever been quite like Alla Nazimova Salome. Next. Wow. That's what I mean. This is Salome. So Natasha Rampova, who was married to Valentina, she designed the costumes and I think some of the sets. And so these headdresses and these wide-shouldered costumes, that's kind of out there now, I think. That alone, in 1920-something, it was very much very, very avant-garde, and quite frankly, just a little too avant-garde for America at the time, and the whole thing was a huge, expensive, disastrous flop. But now it's one of the things we will remember her most from, because it is one of the few movies that she made that we still have. A lot of her stuff has been lost to time. But I kind of like this because it's okay. Keeping in mind, she's playing Salome. She's playing a 14-year-old girl, and she's 42 here. So that takes some guts just to take that on, I think. So I don't give her points for that. Next. Okay, now this is the Garden of Alla Hotel. This is probably early 30s. So this is Sunset Boulevard. This is Havenhurst. The house that I showed you originally, it was called Havenhurst. That was the name that William Hay gave the house. So that's where we get Havenhurst from. So this is Sunset Boulevard, and this is Crescent Heights. Now the LA city limits ended round about there. So when Alla built the house, in fact when the hotel opened, Sunset Boulevard wasn't even paved yet. It was still a dirt road up to Crescent Heights. The streetcar came east up to Crescent Heights and then stopped. It was a dirt track, basically, or probably a wide dirt track, but it was nothing much more than a dirt track west from
it. It was called Beverly Boulevard.
And it was called Beverly Boulevard.
Yeah, so right.
Okay, so next. Actually, can you go back? Yeah. Okay, so this was the house that we were seeing at the beginning. This was the main house, and this had been Alla Nazimova's home, and the rest of it up to this building here was her property. So when the Adamses came to her, crooks that they were, but when they came to her and said, we've got this really good idea, it actually really was a good idea. It was just a shame that they were con artists and built her out of her money. But so these were the villas that were dotted around what was her backyard. This one around here, villa number 1, was where Scott Fitzgerald came. He came to the Garden of Alla in 1937 because he had a $1,000 a week contract with MGM that he needed desperately. He was hugely in debt because by this time Zelda wasn't doing well, and she was in an expensive sanatorium, and his daughter Scotty was in an expensive boarding school, and he was deeply in debt. So when he came to Hollywood, he rented villa number 1. Unfortunately for him, Scott Fitzgerald by this time was a world-class alcoholic, and he moved to the Garden of Alla, which was a non-stop party, so that kind of didn't work out very well. Okay, next. Okay, so this is the person taking this photograph was standing on Sunset Boulevard, and this was the front entrance. So the Garden of Alla was the main sign seen here, and this was the main building of the Garden of Alla, which not many people really rented because these people who came to stay at the Garden of Alla, they were people under contract with the studio, so they may have been contracted to write 3 pictures at MGM. So they would be here for months. And the reason why the Garden of Alla was so attractive was that they had their own kitchens. So they could cook. We're not talking about staying overnight at the Holiday Inn on the way to Santa Monica or something. This was a place where they could make a home. And because they had other people, other writers from back east that they could hang out with, it was very much a community. It became very much, this is the way I see it, very much it's kind of a microcosm of Hollywood itself because of all these creative people. Now you notice the list of people I read out, none of them were front office types, none of them were the bean counters or the yes men. There was very much a creative community that flowed in and out of the Garden of Alla, which made it more interesting than, quite frankly, a bunch of studio accountants. So it was that sort of atmosphere. So Richard, next. And this was probably the most famous sign. This stood on the corner near the front, and this stood looking east and west along Sunset Boulevard. This is one of the more famous photos that you find because it showed the Garden of Alla Hotel and all its great. That was quite a large sign, and in that scene that I just read, that's the sign that Marcus was looking up, going, "Oh, I guess she isn't here anymore." He wasn't really expecting to see that sign. Now this is the backyard. One of the first things Alla did when she bought the hotel was build a pool. The legend has it that it was built in the shape of where the Black Sea, where she came. She came from Yalta in the Ukraine originally. It also looks like a grand piano, so I don't know how truthful it is, but it is around this pool that a lot of parties and other things, I imagine, took place. So we're standing sort of at the edge of the pool, looking back towards the main house. Next. And this is sort of a different angle. This is the diving board that Marcus got hauled up on by Brophy, the manager. This is sort of closer to the back of the main house. Next. You go back. Okay, this is the front. The original shot that I was showing you right at the top didn't look sort of very Spanish mission-y that this does. So the $65,000 that Alla Nazimova spent redoing it was to make it more Spanish mission-y kind of architecture that she preferred. And I just sort of love the little Juliet balcony and the arched windows here that she had put in, because the original house didn't really look like that. Next. Now this was the main foyer. It was just the entranceway when Alla had it, but when they turned it into a hotel, it became the front foyer. The front desk was there, and there was, I've seen another picture where the telephone for everybody's use, because 1920s and 30s wasn't really till post-war that everybody had their own telephone. So there was a kind of like a little, not a phone booth, but like a public phone that you could use sort of on the other side of this couches. But so that was the main check-in foyer for the Garden of Alla. Now this is a postcard that Scott Fitzgerald sent to himself. I guess he had a slow creative day or something. So he was staying in the Garden of Alla, and he wrote himself a postcard telling himself that he was staying at the Garden of Alla. I'm not saying he was drunk at the time. I'm just saying it could be. It's a possibility. But I thought that was kind of a find.
Writing letters to yourself is a good thing to do if you're very depressed. It's a very good spiritual exercise.
Okay, now this is the closing night party. Now the closing night party at the Garden of Alla, because after 32 years, the Garden of Alla had a bit of a reputation. So when they decided to close it down, because by the late 50s it had become a bit seedy, so they decided to sell it and close it down. So the closing night party, it was announced that if you were going to come dressed as somebody who was very popular when the Garden of Alla opened. So somebody who was really popular in 1927. So it was a big costume party. They expected about 3,000 people. 10,000 people turned up in costume. Francis X. Bushman and his wife, who attended the opening night party, came to the closing night party. And in a tribute to Alla, in a tribute to our girl, they projected her movies onto the side of the building all night long, because this party lasted all night long. Half the crowd ended up into the pool, of course. It wouldn't be a Hollywood party unless somebody ended up in the pool and lingered half the crowd. So I was very glad to find this sort of tribute. They hadn't forgotten Alla Nazimova for the closing night party, so she was there for the closing. Thanks. Okay, and this is the shameless self-promotion part of the program. These are my 3 books. The Garden on Sunset is what starts it. Then we move into the Trouble with Scarlet, which takes place during the couple of years when they were casting Gone with the Wind. I chose that because that was a big thing in Hollywood. Who would get to play Scarlett O'Hara? And of course the person they chose was British. So that in itself, it was a big thing. So a lot of stuff was going on during Hollywood at that time. And the book I'm working on at the moment, which will be coming out later this year, Citizen Hollywood, that is set against the fight over Citizen Kane, where, of course, Orson Welles decided to take on Hearst, thinking that he could, and that again was an issue that came to be very, very important, especially at a place like the Garden of Alla, because it was a very tight-knit community. These people were there, they supported each other, and they were the creative people, because the fight for Citizen Kane turned into the fight between the creators and the management, the people who were there to make art versus the people there to make money, basically, yes. So I'm hopeful that will come out at the end of the year. So in closing, if you want to find out more information about my stuff, I do have some promotional postcards, so see me afterwards. I can give you some information. There's also a lot of information about history of Hollywood, like a Hollywood timeline, and a lot of the information I've collected about cafes and restaurants and bars and speakeasies that I've researched and incorporated into my narrative. There's a lot of information about that. And one more thing is, I would like to introduce a friend of mine. John, could you just stand up for a second? Everybody say hi, John.
Hey, everybody.
John is writing a book, a non-fiction account of the history of the Sunset Strip, which of course the Garden of Alla is an important part of. And we got to talking about Alla Nazimova, and we lamented the fact that so many people have forgotten her, because she was really quite something in her time. She was a woman producing, starring and writing movies at a time when, you know, best most people could hope for was, I don't know, behind the makeup counter at Bullock's and the typing pool. So she was really quite a trendsetter, and we've decided that she needs to be remembered better than we are. So we've launched the Alla Nazimova Society.
Yay!
Thank you. You can find us at allanazimova.com, and if you'd like to visit our site and sign up on our mailing list. And there's a lot of information about her life, about her movies and her plays and her contributions to art that we think it's time people sort of learned a bit more about. So drop by Turnbull.com or allanazimova.com. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you. You were wonderful. Your book, do you have some books that people want to buy? What's going on with that?
The books, I came in on the subway, so I couldn't really lug all these heavy books in 102-degree heat, thank you very much. But the books are available in all formats. Paperback, Kindle, Nook, audiobook. If you go to my site, martinturnbull.com, you'll see all the information there. Whatever format you want it in, I got it for you. The audio book for Trouble with Scarlet is nearly finished. John Zack, who does the audio, he emailed me yesterday and said, nearly there. So that'll be coming along probably in the next month.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. Let's stand up for a second. Stand up, John. Just stand up. I think just in the wind calculation. Does everyone want John to come and speak for the first time about unincorporated Sunset? Okay. Let's take a break. So it's about 12:45. Yeah. Good. All right. Where's Marc Chevalier? Marc, why don't you stand up just so people can anticipate your talk in about 15-20 minutes. This is Marc. When we come back from our break in about 15-20 minutes, Marc, you will talk about Schwab's Pharmacy. Nathan Marczak is on the way.
A lot more than that.
I know. I want to thank everyone for coming. Stay tuned. We have some flyers. We have a couple left of flyers just about lava and what we do. Some interesting stuff coming up. And so ask me questions, ask Marc questions, go downstairs, get a drink, get a sandwich, and we'll see you back here in about 15-20 minutes.